Humans on the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today we need to talk about the future of Yu-Gi-Oh! And what decks are on the horizon, what decks are most exciting. And I think for the purpose of this video, I'm actually going to leave out the Terminal World archetypes. So Ice Barrier, Ritual Beast, Infernoid, and I guess you could also throw the Gen X stuff in there, even though they're pretty poop. Not worried about those. I'm going to exclude those from this list, mainly for the sole purpose that, like, we still, to this day, have no confirmation of when or if we're going to get those cards during this, even this calendar year, and who knows? Konami has done weird stuff before. We don't get stuff imported for years, so who knows? And so other than that, as far as confirmed products coming our way, it's literally just Legacy of Destruction, basically. Now, I know they've also started, like, the reveals for, Infinite Forbidden, but we don't really know anything except for, like, the Exodia stuff and that weird Dark Magician card. So there's not really that much outside of Legacy of Destruction. We don't have a structure deck confirmed yet. The only other thing we even have confirmed, but no information on, basically, is the new Light Legendary Duelist. So that's not coming till May, which means in the TCG that's probably not coming till like August, September-ish. We're a ways away from a lot of stuff. So what I want to talk about is the 10 decks that I think are going to jump up the most from Legacy of Destruction. I think this is going to give us a good scope of also how little Legacy of Destruction is going to change the game itself, which is a little bit sad. But if you're a big fan of rogue decks, these are a lot of decks that are going to, I think, jump either, if they were rogue, into a higher level of rogue, or maybe they even weren't playable at all and now they're going to jump to a higher level. So going over my top 10 decks from Legacy of Destruction, I think take a good jump. But I think this gives us a good scope on, like, Konami, what's going on? Where's the rest of the stuff? Because if this is everything, Legacy of Destruction feels like more of a setup set that's going to set us up for more stuff to climb into the next set, into Infinite Forbidden and beyond. But it doesn't feel like it itself is going to change a ton. But let's get into it. Number 10, this is in order, by the way, in my opinion, of like how much these decks change. Not how good they are at the end, but actually how big of a jump they take. So the first one for me that I think is interesting is Voiceless Voice. This is already showing in the OCG that they're a really solid deck. It's already getting some decent results in the TCG on really early reviews. But they don't take that much, and that's why they're all the way back at number 10. Theoretically, this could have been a number 1 option, but I think the problem is they're already decent, and I don't think these cards push them that much further. I do think this card, Blessing, is probably a solid one-of for the deck. It's a good recovery card, but the new ritual that they get is, like, I don't think playable. I don't think any, like, Voiceless players are actually going to end up playing that card. So they get one nice one-of, and that's it. And the only reason it made the list was basically just because the deck's already that good. So it's nice. It's a good card for them, but it doesn't. It's not going to change that much. It probably just takes an extra slot in the main deck. Number 9, Ancient Gears. Now I think Ancient Gears actually take a pretty solid jump, and I honestly, we're not even talking about Ancient Gears here. Let's just call a spade a spade. We're probably talking more Earth Machine here if we're trying to talk legit, competitive potential overall. But I do think there are some nice cards here. Ancient Gears still don't really have any interruption, but at least they can potentially pull from some of the other Earth Machine archetypes to maybe get some interaction from their sides, whereas the Ancient Gear cards kind of provide some boosted engine potential overall. I think that can maybe push them a little bit further. Ancient Gear or Earth Machine already gets like small tops here and there. I think this could maybe help them. It could be another engine at their disposal to help them go to the next gear. Anyway, Val Monica, number 8. This one's cool. They actually do get really good support, but I still can't put them that much higher on this list because this support does not skyrocket them overall. They went from an absolute nothing deck to maybe a rogue deck. These engine cards are actually really nice, but the problem is the way they design this archetype, it feels like they have to get so much to work to do anything. Otherwise, they do absolutely nothing. I'm still not confirmed. I'm still not entirely sure that, like, with interruptions, with hand traps, with all that stuff, that they're actually going to still be able to get to their game plan consistently enough to be, like, a reliable, competitive option. I'm totally down to be shown wrong on that. This is just, it is a really different archetype than we're used to seeing. It is super unique, and maybe that makes it harder to judge, but I still believe at this point it's not quite there. But I do think they took a big step, and I do think if they get another strong wave in Infinite Forbidden, then they might actually be able to jump. I mean, we saw Exosister jump with Malfa and Magnifica, maybe we could be seeing something kind of going on here. We'll see. Number 7, Lightsworn. Lightsworn, I think, is playable. I think prior to this support, it probably just wasn't really playable competitively. But I do think now it could potentially be solid on the regional level. But I think that's about where the ceiling ends. I still think it's a poor man's, even though it's like a decent engine, decent cards in it, I still think it's a poor man's tier limit. And I don't think anybody would argue against that, because tier limit is a golden man's every archetype. But I just think it still suffers from some of that same essence of like, you're going to have the deck that has a good amount of bricks. Now the deck has gotten a little bit better at handling those bricks, but not, perfect at handling those bricks. And so when you play a deck that's like, a quarter bricks, a quarter of really good engine cards, and then some cards that can kind of function a little bit of both, of like being good dumps and being good millers, it can kind of promote like a somewhat brickier style that also a lot of times doesn't have room for a lot of non-engine. So, if you're going to be one of these decks that like relies on RNG and has a lot of gas, you have to have the full-on gas potential that something like Tier Limit has. I'm not fully convinced it's all the way there, but I do think it's good enough to potentially start getting some regional tops here and there, and I think that's enough to get them on the list here at number 6. Or they're still 7. Yeah, they're 7. Number 6 on the list, though, Momento. I'm actually quite excited for this one. I actually have the core for this. I've already picked it up. I actually think it's a really cool archetype. I love the idea behind it, taking old classic vanillas and revamping them into an archetype of basically like reborn kind of like zombie-ish monsters. They're not actual zombies, but like that idea of like reborning like a vanilla is like kind of like a dead monster that's not going to see play in Yu-Gi-Oh! Most likely, unless you're Genius Loci. But anyway, as far as the actual archetype goes, this was an archetype very centralized around their main deck boss monster, and I still think that's mostly true, but they do get some really strong engine additions. Being able to now be fusion based and just make this guy, and this guy is insane. There are like a bunch of 1-card combos that get you to this guy. This guy is a Search 2. He is a really good engine card. I think it pushes them in a really good direction that they needed. Now, the last thing I want to see with like one more wave of support in Infinite Forbidden before, they probably are done for the time being, is an alternate win condition. It still feels like the deck is way too centralized around the main deck boss monster, to the point where like if your opponent just builds their interruption plan, whatever, it's hand traps, or if you're going second, they just say, I won't let him stick the boss monster, and that's all they focus on, then they'll win the game, right? So I'd like to see some sort of secondary win condition. Maybe it's another fusion if they're going that route. That's like, it's just another fusion, but it's an actual like end board piece, a boss monster piece. That would be really cool to see. Something alternative for us to pivot into if our opponent's not going to let us stick the big dragon. I'd really like to see that. But I do think this archetype's actually in a pretty good place. I actually think it's a rogue deck after this support, but I think it can go even higher potentially if they get one more solid wave. Number 5, Yubel. Yubel gets really good cards. They get an awesome field spell that basically searches their whole archetype. It searches any fiend with 0/0 stats. I made a whole video about all the good targets if you want to check that out. But they also get an insane extender in Infernal Grave Squirmer. This guy is basically 2 fiends on field. Really good extender for the deck, and he basically single-handedly is going to allow this deck to facilitate like Unchained plays. So same way that like kind of some Labyrinth builds play the Unchained package, this deck is going to be able to do that. And so basically whatever Yubel did before, it's now able to do that, but then also add like the double interruptions that come with the Unchained package. So like a double pop, basically, like a steal, a pop, and even like technically follow-up as well, in the form of using the Link 2 and putting the Link 2 engrave, which if any fiend on the field is destroyed, it just like is reborning something. Also really solid. So really good potential here. This really pushes them in a good direction. Also, these cards can kind of apply to some other fiend decks. I talked about that as well with those cards, but in the video. But I still think this is really solid, and Yubel's already looking like a legit competitive deck in the OCG early format for them post a Legacy of Destruction. It's really cool. Number 4, Melodious. This may be of the decks on this list, This may be the number one deck I'm personally excited to play the most. I think it's actually really under the radar right now. I think I've only seen a few players and content creators actually putting respect on this deck's name. I think it has some really powerful like one card payoffs. I think it becomes one of those decks that like very low investment but very good card economy return. I think to me it reminds me kind of Marine Cess, except for a better payoff, like better interruptions that you're ending on. But a similar amount of like recursion as you're going through your combo lines, a good amount of one card plays, and I think there's some really cool stuff there. Now, is it perfect? No, but I think for what it is, it's going to be a deck that's going to be able to fit a ton of non-engine because of all the one card plays, and I think that's going to leave it in a pretty decent spot. So I'm excited to play it. I hope some other players pick it up too, and I'm excited to figure out the goo with this deck for sure. Number 3, Tenp Dragon. This one's weird to me because I'm not entirely sure how to feel about it. When I read these cards, I wasn't overly impressed, but I think the biggest thing to remember always is anytime we get a new dragon deck, whether it's Dragon Maid, whether it's Tenp Dragon, or anything, we already just have such a strong base in the form of Dragon Link. Think of all the amazing Dragon Link cards, right? Any dark or light-based format like the Bestials, walk right in here and have something to say about it. Right? Have Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres being an amazingly good generic defensive tool for dragon-based decks. There's just already so many good engines and generic cards that these cards can already make use of, that I think like it just becomes another variant of Dragon Link. And even if you think it's a little bit worse than Dragon Link, you would still argue a little bit worse Dragon Link is still a solid rogue deck, even though we're not in a dark or light-based format. So I think it's cool. I think it's interesting. I'm also not going to be surprised if we get another wave in Infinite Forbidden as well. So there's that. That can only help, can't hurt. And I think that's definitely something to look at. So if you're a Dragon Link player, this may be a potential pivot now that like Bestials aren't particularly good in the format. Maybe this is another engine that kind of helps fill that slot to still maintain power in the deck. But we'll see. And number 2, Reika. You guys knew those are going to be on here somewhere. You probably just weren't sure exactly how high. Some people are probably going to think this is a little high, and I don't fully disagree. But I think the biggest thing for Reika for me is that this being in this list, it's Reika. This is not just Reika Bee Trooper. This is not just Reika Ogdoadic or whatever, Reika Trap Tricks. This is Reika. So technically any deck that's going to play the Reika engine, and Reika really can't play as a pure deck right now with the kind of support they have, any of those variants. And I think that's probably why it ranked higher on my list, because even if none of these decks are like high level meta, between all 5 of probably the major variants, I wouldn't be surprised if any of them are trickling tops here or there. Even if it's 1 a week, 2 a week, whatever, if they combine for 5 or 6, then you're like, whoa, Reika's just kind of like out and about a little bit. You got to be wary of that. So I think it's cool. I think this archetype specifically is probably going to get a solid wave. This archetype, and everybody's made the comparison, reminds me so much of Tri-Brigade, not only in the way it functions, supporting 3 different types and kind of bringing them together, but the fact that on initial release isn't amazing. It needs to combine with other engines. And then in the second support, that's where Tri-Brigade took off as one of the best decks in the game, and then eventually became the best deck in the game for a little bit. I would not be surprised if the same thing follows suit here. We'll have to see what comes in the next wave, but I even think for right now, just because there's so many different variants you can mess with right now, I think it could be getting tops in multiple different ways. So I'm here for it. I have it at number 2. And number 1 for me is Centurion. This deck fell off in the OCG, I believe, because they banned Calamities, and they weren't able to do the Calamities lock anymore. But their next wave ended up being a really solid wave with a really awesome new Synchro 12, a really an interesting spell card that's an extender, and actually a solid main deck extender as well in Gargoyle 2. I think it puts them in a really good spot. I think it puts them in a much better position to perform without Calamities. It makes them able to perform basically the way they were originally intended. Not to lock your opponent out of the game, but to play this mid-rangey, control-y game that's all about resources, all about playing on the opponent's turn. And I think they do that so much better now in a way that they were ever intended. So I think they may potentially climb back to playability in the OCG, and I think in the TCG, I think we're barreling towards seeing Calamities get hit just in time for these cards to come out, because these are the kind of cards where, like, while Calamity's still out and about, there's like no reason to play the new 12. The 12 doesn't like change anything for the archetype. But if you ban the degenerate part of the deck, then these cards become integral to the strategy. The spell less or so, but I do think the main monster's solid, and I do think the 12 out of all of them is like huge. He's actually super, super key and allows them to do some really cool lines that they weren't able to do before, and actually potentially pivot into different lines, which is great. So I love it. I've always liked this deck. It's been a little bit too expensive for me to get at the moment, but I do think this is closing in on making this deck something that I might have to pick up, because it's right in my wheelhouse. I've held off long enough. Hopefully, Konami bans Calamities and this all comes to fruition. But there you go. You know, for a deck in the TCG that's already, you know, like borderline a top 5 deck, like kind of like clawing at the top 5 slots, to get a wave like this is really, really solid. So there you go. That's why I have them number 1. But as you can see, again, like nothing too crazy. Like I don't see any of these decks becoming meta after this set at all. I think at anything, they're just climbing up the tiers of rogue status, or maybe even tier 2, you know, for like Centurion, and Voiceless is already there, but it just doesn't move that much. There's not that much impact this set has overall, but I do think it sets up a lot of things. We talked about it, right? Centurion, Momento, and Val Monica could all be looking at the next wave in the next core set that could potentially get them where they finally want to go. Reika should get some more support. Tenp Dragon should get some more support. I wouldn't be flabbergasted if Yubel gets one more little tiny wave. I just wouldn't. And you know, that's kind of where we're looking at it. And even Voiceless could even get one more little wave. So, you know, over half of this list could be looking at more stuff down the line. I hope that's where we go. It's a good setup set. It just isn't going to change that much by itself. So I'm still excited. There's still a good amount of decks on here that I'm definitely going to look into, and I hope you guys feel the same way too. So let me know your guys' thoughts down below. What are you most excited for from Legacy of Destruction specifically? Just because right now that's like the only thing in the near-ish future that, you know what I mean, that like we're getting at all. But let me know what you're most excited for. Let me know what your thoughts are on the horizon of some of these decks climbing up competitive play. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, subscribe to the channel for more stuff later on. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.